Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome. My name is Dr. Chanel Wilson, founder of Urology Unbound, and just really excited to have everyone here this evening. We have a wonderful panel and a wonderful program for you tonight. And so we really want this to be interactive. Definitely please ask questions in the chat or raise your hands if you have any questions as we go throughout the program. This is for you guys to, get basically a good understanding of the application season, the interview season. But of course, if there's anybody on the program who is not applying this year, we want to be able to answer questions for you as well. So please don't hold back. I will first start by introducing our panelists. We have Dr. Jair Santiago-Lastra, who is the program director at University of California in San Diego, and Dr. Tracy Downs, who is associate professor. I'm sorry, I didn't look at the fee at University of Virginia. And we also have Dr. Lamont Barlow, who is one of our Urology Unbound leads and also is on faculty at NYU. So Dr. Santiago-Lastra, can you go ahead and start by introducing yourself, and also giving everybody just some background information about what they can be expecting this year.
Hi, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces actually in the group, so really excited to see some old and new friends here. I just took over this year as Vice Chair of Education and Program Director for UC San Diego. So I'm really excited to see how this year sort of pans out for all of our applicants, as it would be the first time that I have a direct kind of oversight and impact over the process. I think it's an exciting time, and there have been some changes this year concerning the AUA match. One of the important differences is that interviews have been changed from being a completely virtual landscape to one that allows virtual versus hybrid versus in-person, depending on program preference. From my perspective, I do have mixed feelings about this. I think there certainly may be applicants who are excited about the prospect of interviewing in person, and there certainly are some programs that are going about it in a really interesting way by offering interviews where they fly candidates out to the institution and allow them the opportunity to interview in person. And I think that in an ideal world, that would be how we conduct our interviews. Unfortunately, not every program has the ability to interview applicants in person and sponsor those visits. So my concern is that can certainly lead to some inequities because we don't all have a hefty bank account to fly across the country to conduct these interviews. What I want to tell all of you applicants, regardless of how you feel about the types of interviews that you might be offered, is that there are many people and many programs across the country that are excited to receive applications like yours, that are looking for you and that are interested in what you have to offer. And you've worked really hard to get to this point. And hopefully through this evening, we can provide you with a lot of useful tips to help you enhance your application. As far as expectations of applicants this year, I think similar to many years, we expect to see applicants who bring something unique to the field of urology, we're looking for applicants with a growth mindset who, through their lived experience and their work ethic, have really blazed their career path, and who are really enthusiastic about the field and want to come in to the field to drive change and to enhance patient care. I'm looking for people who are eager to learn, and I'm looking for people that will teach me as well as I teach them. And I want to also emphasize that there are so many aspects to the application that we look at, but really important aspects of the application are always letters of recommendation, and clinical and scholarly performance. So we were looking for excellent students who have strong letters of recommendation, and who are very enthusiastic and motivated in the field of urology. Other things really enhance that application, like research, for example. It does show that someone is committed to research and follows projects through, but it isn't the be all end all, especially if the applicant has a bunch of other solid and excellent characteristics that make them an outstanding candidate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will go ahead and take a question, Luis.
Hi everyone. Hi, Dr. Santiago-Lastra. First of all, thank you everyone for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Given the change in, how interviews will be conducted, and I mean, I don't know what the specifics for each program are going to be. I'm assuming those are doing hybrid or giving options to do in person or virtual. Would you suggest, if given the option to do it in person, do you think if you choose to do virtual to, save money, that you'll be looked inferiorly to those who, can make it in person?
So, programs that have chosen to do a hybrid interview format have likely chosen to do so because they don't just want to offer opportunities to people who can afford to come in person. They also want to offer opportunities to students who come in virtually. I think that an outstanding candidate will shine through, whether they are in person or virtual. But I would be lying if I didn't say, and I was just mentioning this to the group before we had opened up the forum, that if a really outstanding candidate comes in person, that's going to be really hard to match that up to an outstanding candidate that comes in virtually, if your program is really using interviews as a way to rank candidates. So one thing that I have been implementing and working on with my faculty at UC San Diego is really changing the way that we utilize interviews, and really using interviews as a way to just kind of get a sense of people, but really evaluating the students based on their application, their letters, and the overall holistic kind of package that they present. Because we've all had, bad interview days. I was just talking to them about that like horrendous debate performance that Barack Obama had against Mitt Romney. I don't know if you guys recall this, but he was like scribbling on a notebook and like just really disengaged. And he is, a fantastic speaker. So if he can have an off day where he's just like not on and not performing, imagine like the rest of us mortals. Like it's just, it's a lot to ask, and interview season is really long. So for me, if somebody has an off interview day, that's not the be all end all. But it does, it does impact depending on how people evaluate you. So I take that with a grain of salt. I would say if you are really interested in programs, you could probably in your mind kind of say, okay, what is my budget and how many of those in-person programs can I afford to visit? If you can't afford to visit any, I think you can depend on the strength of your application. And I don't know that I would worry about it too much. There's so many other things to be concerned about, right? But I do think that there are some impacts that we're not recognizing. And overall, I think the SAU's decision, for whatever reason that they took it, was probably not the decision that I would have made. But we will see. I may be wrong, but I would have probably stuck with the virtual. The AAMC does recommend that virtual interviews are the most equitable way to interview candidates. So I do have it's not like I think that that's the organization that determines everything that I do, but in this case, I do agree with them.
Thank you.
Dr. Downs, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks. Good evening to everyone. So first, congratulations on finding urology. It's a great field, and oftentimes, we don't get to rotate on it. We find out too late. So again, congratulations. I think I'm probably one of the older, if not the oldest, on the panel, and so I'll kind of give some things about maybe the pre-signaling days and some of the things that I think have never really changed and that still are relevant. So, a strong personal statement. It's really your opportunity to kind of tell us what your superpower is or your secret sauce, for us to get to know you. What we found out, I think, in the post-signaling days, at least at UVA, is, and this may be, not an association, but probably folks who've rotated at our place have matched if they've chosen a sub-I. So I think being really intentional about where you do your sub-I. There was a paper, and Dr. Barlow can comment, a while ago that showed for New York City-based programs, having a connection to New York City was really important. So let's say you're out in San Diego or Sacramento, and you have no connections to New York. You didn't go to undergrad there. You didn't do med school. And then suddenly to do a sub-I, that might be your only chance to break in. But otherwise, I think if you're just applying and you get an interview there, I would factor that in. And that's kind of the New York factor that is very different than other geographic areas. On the virtual versus in person, I guess when I was interviewing, I always felt like I could sell myself better, was just praying that I would get offered an interview to go and do that in person. I know that's time intensive. I know it costs more money. But like Dr. Santiago-Lastra said, it's hard to unsee what you've seen in person. And so I think you have to weigh that. It would probably be a program that I was more interested in. The first factor that's probably most important is when you submit all of your applications and how many interviews you get back. That is very telling in terms of being able to match successfully. And then I think every program is good. And so don't get overthink it and get trapped in the US News and World and Report and saying, oh, this program's better. You have a long journey and a long career. And so I factor things in like, well, where did students from my med school go and match? Because they're a proven entity. They know that product. Do I have a family that's close to that area or friends? Is this a time for me to jump across the country and experience something different? All of those are equally as important as how great the training program is. And you'll be able to get the fellowship that you want. It would be very rare, but there's things that you can do or tweak afterwards in order to do that well. And the last thing I'll share that is when I was previously at Wisconsin, what we would do is following our interview days, we would have like a gathering at like just a local restaurant in a dedicated room to get to, and we'd have the residents come, the faculty come, the interview applicants come. And it was our time to just kind of get to know them, see if there are any quirks, and vice versa for them to get to know us. Um, and when some people couldn't attend that or they had to race out of town, um, like it or not, that kind of told us a little something. Maybe we don't call it signal preferencing, but it did kind of tell us a little bit about how serious they were about our program. And I think that just underscores that if you can be in person, it does have some benefits.
Absolutely. All great points. At the end of the day, there are 600 or 700 people applying for 300 spots. They're interviewing 40 to 50 people for 2-3 spots. And everybody is getting the interview. So that means that they all pass that initial screen. So, we're all adults here. We all know the way the world is. None of us here on the program want to sell you butterflies and rainbows. So we know that it's going to be preferable to go in person, right? But we are also saying that, you don't want to put yourself like on the streets because of it. But also you want to make sure that you put in as much as you possibly can, as you really can this year, because this is it, right? Like, this is the best chance you'll have. It's not the only chance. It's not the only thing you can do. It's not the only thing that will make you happy. But at the end of the day, everybody's here trying to get into urology. So don't hedge your bets. Put it all out there. As much as you can. Don't be afraid to be out to reach out to people. You're your best advocate. And so set yourselves up for success as best as you can. We've got some really great questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask Dr. Santiago-Lastra and then, of course, Dr. Downs. We're talking about excellent qualities of candidates that we're looking for that can be brought across in the personal statement. And oftentimes people struggle with how to tell their story and also get those qualities across while telling their story so that, they can talk about their successes and they can be attractive to programs. So can you tell the students kind of, or give them some examples of how they could possibly spin their story and get those qualities in, and what qualities it is that you're looking for in their story? Personal statement.
So, one thing I would do before you embark on just like putting words on paper, which is how I tell my students to actually write papers, is just like write whatever you can on that paper and then we'll edit it later. With a personal statement, you do want to nest a little bit with some ideas and some I statements about yourself before you kind of write it out. And sometimes it helps to do this with a mentor who really believes in you, or friends, even family, because one of the things that I find that applicants do is that they don't actually realize all of the strengths that they have. So when I write people letters, I tell them, can you give me 3 qualities about yourself that you think are important to convey in your letter of recommendation? And it's always like, I work hard every single day. And I'm like, no, let's really kind of dig deep there and find your voice and like what sets you apart, because there usually is so much more. So spend some times with like some I statements, and then also spend time with vulnerability. And the vulnerable part isn't like telling a catastrophe that occurred to you, but it's really more about sharing something that really lets somebody know who Chanel is or who Lamont is, beyond like why you enjoy urology. So many personal statements are about why urology is the right field that you love. And we all love urology. We know that. We don't want to hear one more essay about the renal hilum. But we do want to hear personal stories about people. And then the other part of it is that with personal statements, it's often better to have like a good enough personal statement that tells people about you and gives like some details about you that they may not be able to glean from your application that you think are really important for people to know. But at the same time, we will always remember the really bad personal statements, like the ones that say how, Vanderbilt University is their #1 choice of all time when they're applying to UC San Diego. Like that's not going to be forgotten. So just keep that in mind. Don't make that the be all end all and spend that much time. Just kind of nest with it a little bit and remember your 4th grade, like brainstorming maps about writing an essay 101. Make a lot of I statements about yourself, brainstorm with family like, hey, what do you think makes me a great applicant? Or ask a mentor, etc. Add some vulnerability to it as far as like sharing something personal about you that's not anywhere else in your application, and then just write something that's legible and coherent and grammatically correct and does not name drop an institution that's one beyond the one that you're actually applying to.
Clearly, they never get forgotten. These bad personal statements. Dr. Downs, what do you think about this?
Yeah, don't do the the opposite institution. That cracks me up. Yeah, I think so. Your mentor, um, who hopefully is your program director, but it may be someone else. They need to be someone who they are invested in you. They are, when the match day comes, they are anxious as you are. They're nervous. They're hoping that everything goes well, because then they've got skin in the game, just like you do. Um, and then what I'll often ask is like, show me your CV, and I'll just, because a third person can see things you can't see. And so that person needs to not only see things you can't see, be someone who cares deeply about you and about your success, because I think they'll put more time. They won't just kind of go over it really quickly and not pull anything out. Um, and then there's kind of a story in there. So it could be things that you don't take as like a impressive journey. Like what if you're I'll give some examples. Someone I had mentored from undergrad to a gap year, etc. He was from Iran, and his first couple years in the country, he didn't know English, and so and he had a speech impediment, and so that was a really big challenge for him. Um, and so in that regard for him, it was kind of like, well, you're not an underrepresented person. Maybe that story or journey you're thinking isn't part of, your fabric or your journey. But it was like, well, how did you overcome that? Tell me, what did you do? How did that feel? How does that change how you treat people now? What if you're interacting with someone with English as a second language? Are there anything that you do differently or think about differently that would make a difference? So really kind of unpack that and think about how that ties into your story. Because there's kind of, in some ways, you're kind of writing a little bit of a novel. And so really kind of figure out what are the key things about who you are. I agree with Dr. Santiago-Lastra. I know you love urology. It's a really good field. I get a little bored hearing all of that. Not because I don't like urology, I don't want to hear it, but I want to know about you. What do you bring to the table? What's your journey been? I figure you like urology and it's a match. Otherwise, you wouldn't be applying or spending all this time and money to go down this pathway. So I personally am less. Tell me about your love for urology. Now, there may be a case or a patient that you've seen that was a light bulb moment that you do want to connect it to. But again, it's that storytelling art of who you are and where you come. And then one thing I'll do often on some of my talks and not, which might be applicable. So so there's this book that I read maybe a year ago called Same as Ever. and it's basically talking about how they talk to Jeff Bezos and they say, what do you predict is going to happen in the next 10 years or so? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, but what I do know is that things like great customer service, being efficient at delivery, all of those things, so same as ever. And so it might be kind of the theme. And I don't, and this may not be in your wheelhouse about who you are, but I don't know if you saw the Hakeem Jeffries kind of speech last night, but I mean, it was just that kind of cadence of same as ever, or and so there may be a book or something that's really spoke to you, that you can kind of personalize and draw a little bit of interest, because the people going through the applications are going through so many things and everything looks the same, and we're just like, okay, and we're like, okay, okay, you went to, okay, that's good. They love you. You're amazing. And it's like, okay, but then it's like, wow, okay, so that happened. How did they do this? Okay, tell me more. And so really use it differently, in it, as you're kind of working through it. Those are the things I would say on the personal statement, your characters. For me, as you know, a long time ago, this is the 90s when I was applying, but my old mentor was like, these are what make a great resident. This was at UC San Diego as a med student there. He's like, you're a team athlete, you drive an old car, and some other things. So that was his like rubric. And so I kind of fit those things. And and so again, it's like taking hard work is so ambivalent of a term. Everyone's a hard worker, but personalized, what does that really mean? And how does that amplify your story?
Absolutely. One thing I tell all of my mentees is, remember, this is a job application. You're not trying to get into medical school and convince people that you want to be a doctor. You're already going to be a doctor. We already know that. They want to know, are you going to be a good, dependable resident who's not going to complain, who's going to get the work done that they can trust, and is going to go on and make them proud. So essentially, you use your story to tell them the great things about you, and they can envision this person's not is going to be great here, and they're going to also make us proud. So, like Dr. Santiago-Lastra said, write down the different things that you know about yourself, those strengths that you have, and then, like Dr. Downs says, you get your story, and you get the points in the story that show those I statements. That's how you tell your story, but also show that you are going to be a fantastic worker, because this is a job interview. They don't care if you love urology and you were taken away by the first TERP you saw. They were too. Next question in the comments. It's asking, how would you approach way rotations in terms of timing and reaching out to PDs?
Yeah, let me make sure. So how would you recommend approaching a way rotation?
Yeah, like I guess it sounds like the strategy at doing them, getting to them, getting letters, speaking to people, and getting yourself kind of on the radar.
On the radar, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think so again, is being real specific about, and I know you guys are in those rotations now. So that's all you have in your life on that rotation. That's the first, second, third, and fourth most important thing in your life. End of story. You show up early, you leave late. Um, there's sometimes weird things where people are like, well, when's the rotation end? And maybe the last day is Friday, but technically the curriculum ends on Sunday. And you just have, those are gamesmanship or games. It's kind of things that happen that are kind of sad that they still do, but you make some, well, my last day is this day. And so you just really want to be seen as someone who's dependable. You want to know how to present a patient. You want to get the data. You want to be able to work really well with the residents and your co-students. I've been really impressed this generation. The students from different programs just work well together. I think it says a lot about just who you are as people, that like you're not like being a gunner and trying to win over make someone else look bad. That's not cool. But I've just been shocked at how people continue to give each other opportunities to shine, and that just is incredible for how our field, who it attracts. Um, and then if you aren't getting a chance to present, then kind of speak up, about maybe before the round, say, hey, I'd really like to present this patient, so that I can, demonstrate. And then when you're in clinic, and if you're one-on-one with the attending in clinic, really, get everything, all your ducks in a row. And if you know those things, make sure you share those. I remember this was not a sub-I, but a student who was a third year who rotated, looked at every single patient that I had all of that out, and was pretty quiet individual. And I didn't find out till the end of clinic that they had really done all of that work. And so, how do you insert yourself in there in the right way to save time? And in some ways, you're kind of earning time to be taught by saving the team time. There's kind of that reciprocal payback where you're doing things, and that opens, or it should open the door for some teaching time. And then when you're in the OR, everyone's different. And I always would ask still, hey, anything that you think I could do, or maybe, now with robotics, it's you can almost see the whole case, but there's still some where you can't see much, and there's just a head or a hand, and making sure that you've read that surgery and you know what the steps are. And sometimes you just take a, have you identified the pupil coccygeus yet, or have you done this, just to let them know that you're paying attention and that you're following along, and that can open up a lot of doors. And the last thing is, the residents and students do matter, and so sometimes people will give a certain, they'll put their best foot or face forward for the attendings, but then they'll be a little bit chippy for the residents. And that can go for interview day as well as the rotation. That does not play over well. Trust me that the residents share that with the faculty, and that does have a factor on your ranking, and how good of a fit you are for the program. And if you're, sometimes it will happen where you may be the only woman on an all male team, less now than it used to be, or you may be the only underrepresented person on an all majority team. And how you fit into that, or if you feel like you're a little bit, kind of excluded, is trying to figure out how to navigate that, and reaching out to probably folks on this call to help you kind of, navigate through that type of scenario.
What one last question is when, in terms of approaching for somebody for a letter of recommendation, if they're trying to get a letter from that program, any like tips or tricks on approaching someone, timing of when they should do it, how they should do it smoothly to get a good letter?
So you want to approach the letter writer well in advance, and have all your information, like a, ribbon, bow, everything. So you got your CV, your personal statement, everything for him or her to write it. And then it's okay to say, even ask, like, do you feel comfortable writing a strong letter for me? If they balk at that, then you don't want that person writing your letter. Um, and then you're never bugging the person to keep on them to finish it, because they'll have a lot of letters and they'll be behind. And so you're not a pest. You're actually very helpful to keep bugging them, or at least bugging me, and saying, how's the letter going? How's it done? And then sometimes, and I'll say, what are the 3 or 4 things that are the most important that you've achieved that you want to make sure that I call out in the letter, is important, so that we know you yourself better than we do. But those are some ways to go about the letter, the timing, and the structure.
Totally agree. So, as somebody who writes a double-digit number of letters every academic year, I can tell you that the earlier that somebody tells me that they are seeking a letter of recommendation, the better. I'll just tell you what works for me and then what I did. So what's been working for me, and I'll get requests for letters at many different times. And if the student is really really a great student, and I have time to write the letter, I absolutely will. So I don't refuse to write letters for students that I think would be excellent urologists and that I know. But I really appreciate when people come, even if I've not had the opportunity to fully work with them, if they come in to tell me, hey, Dr. Santiago-Lastra, I'm really excited to work with you. At the end of this rotation, I would love to get a letter from you. Like, what will it take for you to write me a letter of recommendation? And that gives me an opportunity to say, you know, for a good letter, like, I want an in-depth interaction, and I'll talk about some of the things that I evaluate and like to include in the letter. And I tell them how during the sub internship, I'll get pooled feedback from faculty and the residents. And so I'm able to give the applicants an opportunity to understand what goes into that letter, the parts that are standardized, and the parts that are narrative and describe the applicant specifically. And then I also really appreciate when the person sends me a message thanking me for offering to write the letter with that CV, with that personal statement, and with those 3 noteworthy accomplishments that they think should be included in said letter. That makes my job a lot easier. So that's what works the best for me. When I was seeking out letters, I wasn't brave enough to kind of ask for a letter a priori because I was worried about being shot down. But what did work for me was really looking at what faculty tended to have really strong kind of interpersonal interaction with me, or who gave me positive feedback about my performance, and where I actually got to work with them multiple times during a particular sub-I, and I would approach them to ask for a letter. Typically, most places where I did my sub-Is, and I did 4, there would be a department letter that would come of it, and the program director would write it, or the chair would write it, and you know, people would know that letter was coming if you did a good job. So it was kind of like already said to you in the beginning that, like, hey, Dr. Ween at Penn will write you a letter if you do a good job. So it really depends on the program. It is totally okay to ask that in the beginning. We all know that people are looking for letters, and that it is important to get letters from your OAs. So whoever's directing that clerkship probably is writing a lot of letters for students. You want to get an outstanding letter. So if you're seeking out a letter, you got to put your heart and soul into that rotation. I can't tell you how many people submit letters. Remember, we waive our right to see them, but how many students have letters submitted on their behalf that are sort of lukewarm. And so really be sure of your performance, and consistently ask for feedback from the residents and faculty about your performance. Most of the time people will give you upfront feedback about what you need to focus on. And then also timing. Somebody asked about timing of the rotations. And I think there's a really important thing to understand about timing. People do multiple sub-Is. So if I see a student who's doing their first sub-I at my institution, they don't have a home urology program, and these are students that I'm bringing in. I just reached out to a student on this forum who I want to rotate with us. That's, you know, for students who don't have a home urology residency program and are doing that first sub-I and are competing with people who it's their second or third rotation, that can be tough, because by your 3rd month of rotating in urology, there's so much that you've learned, and it is kind of difficult to compete in that way. So it's important to be aware of that, and over prepare, but also maybe save that audition rotation that you're doing for the tail end of your time doing your sub internships. so that you can really shine at the place where you're really trying to seek out that letter. It's not as easy as you may think because people apply and programs get filled up and people have different school calendars. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to go with what you can get, like many things in this whole process. But in general, a more seasoned sub intern is going to perform at a higher level, and you'll notice your performance across time will improve. So definitely with that last sub-I, it is totally reasonable to ask a letter then because you'll probably be at your peak performance at that point. The other piece of it is like you've already submitted ERAS and you have that last sub-I at a place after you've submitted your application and you perform really well again because it's like one of your last sub-Is and they have a really great rapport with you and either offer to write you a letter or you feel like you want to ask for a letter. It's totally fine to ask for a letter at that point. You can submit it to ERAS after programs have downloaded, and then you just have to email programs that you want to get that letter individually and request that they download the letter from ERAS. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. I've even had students kind of ask like, hey, you know, I had an updated letter. Did you receive it? Sometimes we've received it, sometimes not, and they'll make sure that we get it. And you have every opportunity and should take every opportunity to showcase things about you that are positive. And sometimes it does take those extra emails to kind of showcase your accomplishments, even if those applications have already been downloaded by different programs.
Thank you both for that. I was a student from a school that didn't have a home urology program, so I tried to be, and I also didn't have any research, so I tried to be very strategic when I was applying. And I did my first sub-I at Hopkins, and I was very fortunate that the AUA was in Atlanta the year before I applied. And somebody here in Atlanta took me to the R. Frank Jones meeting, and I met Bud Burnett, who ended up being one of my letter writers. So I already knew him from the meeting. I told him I was coming. I asked him in advance, and I actually set up an extra week to rotate with him after the sub-I to make sure I got that letter. And then when I got there, made sure to kind of just see or look around the program. And I went for the most personable people that I could find, urology wise. Everybody was trying to get, the program director, the chairman from Hopkins for the letter, but I wanted the people who seemed like they would have a lot of friends. And so I went to those people and tried to spend time with them. And I asked them early. One, I asked to do the grand rounds with me. So I had that buy-in. So he was my faculty when I had to do my presentation at the end. And then the other, I just spent a lot of time in his clinic. And I got great letters from what I'm told. Everybody thought I went to Hopkins, but it was because I asked early. I knew kind of what I wanted ahead of time. And, you just put yourself out there because this is the time you have to advocate for yourself. So don't worry about the way you look. This is for your future. None of that other stuff matters. Go ahead, Nadir.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Barlow, for organizing this and the panelists. Quick question, what are common mistakes applicants make in terms of how they use their signals? I know we get 30, which obviously sounds like a lot. And, there are no real safety programs in urology. So in light of increasing emphasis on holistic review, how do we kind of find our target programs versus reach programs?
Yeah, hi Nader. Yeah, I think all of us are still trying to figure out the best recommendations to give you all for that around signals. There, there has been some linkage. This is from 2022, 2023 data showing that, that may have increased your interview chances at a place. So I don't know if I have any true hard and fast rules. I might kind of punt over to Dr. Santiago-Lastra and Dr. Barlow about how they kind of counsel their students. But I think if it's a program you're really interested in, then I think a signal makes sense to me. if it's, say, a really great program, it's like your dream and you're hoping that you'll get into, but maybe you haven't done a sub-I, and then maybe you don't get, it becomes clear to you that you just came off the wait list, like you weren't the first round of getting an interview, but now when people decline, you became, offered an interview. That may factor in to me, unless that was a place that you really, really felt strongly that you wanted to go to for more than just the reputation of the program. So adding those other factors like it's close to family, or it's the right size, or there's other students from my school have done excellent. So that's kind of how I kind of think about it. But I'd love to hear what both Dr. Santiago-Lastra and Dr. Barlow think.
It's definitely confusing. I typically will tell, because the SAU is now encouraging applicants to signal even their home institutions, which is definitely opposite of what I have been telling my students and my sub interns these past few years. I for my students at UCSD, I've been telling them, look, I know you are interested in our program. You verbally told that I have a rapport with you, similar to my sub interns. We have a formal application to do a sub internship at UC San Diego. So if you're going to go through the hassle of that application, I'm assuming that you're interested. And I have exit interviews with all of my sub interns where we discuss what their impression was of the program and if they're interested in being interviewed. And so for me, that preference signal, which is intended to make an applicant stand out for their interest, is not necessary for us. And so if they met criteria to be interviewed, they do not need to preference signal us. However, for those 16 to 20 students total, that means that they'll have one extra signal they can give to another program. But in general, right now, I think programs by and large will be interviewing applicants who have signaled them. I think a lot of programs will be doing that. So in general, you should assume that if you want a program to interview you, you must signal them. And otherwise, you can consider that they probably will not interview otherwise. So then you have to be really smart about who you're signaling and think about it on a scale, and maybe kind of like, this is where the BS US News World Report maybe comes into play, because a lot of people will use it to kind of gauge where the good programs are, or even those online, Google Doc sheets where applicants write and review programs. You can kind of see what programs might be popular and have good word of mouth versus other programs that might be smaller, perhaps fly under the radar a little bit as far as the preference signals, and then kind of spread the wealth around. Obviously, always signal places that you are very interested in, but don't just signal the top, programs, because they're going to receive a bunch of signals. So you want to be smart about where you send them. If you, for example, have are conflicted about whether or not to signal a place, or you feel like you don't have necessarily as high a number of interviews as you expected, and you have an engaged mentor who might be able to make some calls on your behalf, you can definitely give them a list of places that you've signaled and just kind of see if they can offer you that support. but as far as signals are concerned, it's kind of the Wild West. We really don't know in urology what impact they're having, but the reality is that they do offer, I think, programs and ability to really look at students who are interested in them. And I think that does make a difference. Maybe not for a University of Michigan program, who's on, everyone kind of talks about them and knows that they're a strong program, but perhaps other programs who may be just as strong. And I'll use UC San Diego as an example. Like we're a program, we consider ourselves at that level, but maybe when applicants are looking at our program, maybe they're looking at UCSF or Vandy, and we're not being looked at in that same caliber. We may receive preference signals from really stellar candidates and say like, look, this person is like fantastic, and they preference signaled us. Like that's going to mean a lot to us. We receive a lot of preference signals, but that's just an example of how programs kind of look at this. Like we want to be noticed as well. And so being smart about who you're signaling definitely makes a difference. The other thing is, if you have the opportunity to network with someone and you meet a urologist at a program that you happen to signal, definitely tell them. Be like, hey, Dr. Such and Such, I am applying to urology, and I actually signaled your program, and I'm like really excited to embark on this process, and I'd love to interview with you guys. I just wanted to let you know that your program is on the top of my list as far as programs, and I did send you a signal. People love that. They like to be needed and wanted. So that's where I think it may benefit applicants, but it's still kind of the Wild West.
Any
You're
thoughts
welcome.
on it?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, because I know we're pushing on time a little bit, is just definitely I've heard people try to like set up your both setting up your list of places you're applying to as like your dream programs, the programs that you think are like within reach, and then not to say safety programs, because like Dr. Down said, all programs are great programs, but sort of tiering it that way. And while we don't have a lot of evidence yet to know the impacts of signaling, I think sort of like spreading your bets is a good strategy of trying to allocate some to like a few to dream programs, realizing those programs are programs that probably will not interview you if you don't give a signal. Having I know at this point at NYU we only interview sub-Is and signals. Like that's just with the number of applicants and people signaling. I think there's a lot of programs that are probably at that point right now. But there's a lot of really great programs that might not have as much attention. Where if you get a signal, you could like, and then you really knock it out of the park. That could be a great home for you and could prevent. I mean, I think there's a lot of very, very strong applicants who don't match every year. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you become a urologist. And so all of the point of everything that everyone is saying here is to try to ensure that everyone here is set up the best way to make that happen. And so I think trying to find all of the range of places to put your tokens is, with the limited knowledge that we have on the impact of tokens, probably good advice, and advice I've heard other people say too.
Yeah, I've never had anyone ask me where I trained for urology. Nobody cares once you get out. Like, your goal is not to be a Vanderbilt urologist. Your goal is to be a urologist. So definitely leave ego out of it. Find the home that you need to be in and set yourself up for success. Before I get to the next question, I just want to ask a quick question. Does anyone know if there is a step 2 cutoff, and if it is 240, or are they doing internal cutoffs? Is that a thing in the way that we used to hear that step 1 was?
Yes.
Yeah, there is a cutoff for some of these programs.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, I know that same here.
Yeah. For our program, last year. We are eliminating that cutoff this year, but our program at UC San Diego last year had a step 2 cutoff. And I know many other programs that have one as well. It is very important for students as much as possible that they submit a step 2 with their application still to this day.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nana.
I think that Dr. Santiago-Lastra already touched on this, so thank you. But my question was about there have been many faculty who have said, they'd be happy to advocate on my behalf, but I didn't really know exactly what that meant. Would that be in relation to, I have a list of programs that I'm interested in? Do you know anyone at this program? Could you talk to them and see if they'd be willing to give me an interview? Is there anything else they can do in the way of advocating? Like, I'm just not really sure what I'm asking for.
Sure. Oh, I can tell you. Nana, what year are you right now? Are you applying?
Yes, I'm applying.
Okay. And so one way, just to peel back, not that I want to Monday morning quarterback you, but one way that you can use to have attendings advocate on your behalf starts for example, sub-Is. You want to do sub-Is in specific places, attendings can advocate on your behalf to get a specific sub-I. I can't tell you how many times I get emails from people like, oh, my student such and such is the God's gift to urology. She must do a sub-I at UC San Diego, and can you fit her in? And honestly, if it's coming, like if Dr. Downs or Chanel or Lamont or any of my friends tells me that a student is stellar and I need to fit them into the rotation, they're gonna get a rotation with me. Even if I already have a full deck of students for that month, that student is coming in. We, again, word of mouth from our colleagues that we trust is really important. So if you have a mentor who's advocating for you to get a sub-I, have them advocate for you to get a sub-I. Urology is really small. A lot of us that have been around the block a few times know people in most places. And if we don't know the people at the program specifically, we know someone who knows someone at the program easily. So that's a way they can advocate for you. When interview season, when applications come around, they can advocate for you by writing you a strongest possible letter of recommendation. They can advocate for you by sitting down with you and giving you feedback when you do your sub-internship about, what things you can do better. They can advocate for you by making phone calls on your behalf, so you can be offered interviews at places where you signal, and you can give them a list of programs. They can advocate for you then when you're submitting your rank list to make sure when programs meet to put you on their rank list that they move you up as high as possible so you rank to match. There's a bunch that faculty member can do. It really depends how much they're willing to advocate for you. And obviously, if they're gonna do this for you, you've got to deliver for them. Like, you have to make sure that if they are advocating for you in that way, that you are going to live up to every possible promise that they made to get you into those positions. And by and large, students do that. It's very rare that there's like a letdown in that way. But just be mindful of those opportunities. And if someone offers to do that for you, they don't do it lightly. And there are many ways that they can take advantage of that. There may be others as well. I'm curious to see what the other faculty have to say, but there's a lot of advocacy that they can do for you.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to just be faculty either, because urology is tiny. So I'm not a urology faculty at all. A bunch of my colleagues in my generation did not go into academics, but every single one of us did fellowship and residency and go to meetings. And so, my very first community mentor here, and he's the one who took me to R. Frank Jones. And then that's what started me on this journey. So any urologist who is close to you or knows urologists, go ahead and talk to them. Dr. Downs, do you have any other ideas about how you can get your mentor to advocate for you in a helpful way, sponsor you also, because that's what we are. That's really what we're talking about, sponsorship.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Dr. Santiago-Lastra said is that person has a relationship. So when I think about a sub-I, I want someone to go to a place where there's just someone like me there who will be invested in the student, and that can only happen if you know the place or know the people. And then when you're picking places to apply for, is that relationship and them knowing, what we say in a letter and how we say it. And then also let's say, your score is 235, and but you got 7 publications, and you just heard some things that some places have cutoffs. How does someone write a letter that's effective to get someone to not use that cutoff, um, based on how they're, it could be made up. Well, I'm just going to make up an example now. As a urologist for over 2 decades in the field, this person's in the top 3% of medical students I've ever worked with. While their score maybe is a little bit below on the USMLE, their continued contribution to the literature is borne out by their multiple publications. This is not a diamond in the rough. They're just a diamond. So there's ways you can say things that hopefully get people to think differently.
That was
But
a
it
whole
really,
pickup line.
yeah, I know, I know. Funny. That's funny. They crack me up. And my wife's like, "Don't go anywhere, man. Don't do it." Um, so, um, so, but you need someone who's going to advocate for you and knows it's relationships matter. They do. And there might be some other folks too, like, or maybe there's someone you rotated on general surgery or something who's just, like, let's say Selwyn Vickers. He's like the CEO, chairman of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and he's like accomplished everything. So most people know who that is. And so if you somehow were in his lab or did something with him, just because he's not a urologist, I mean that's a substantial person with experience. And we don't use those things like top 5%, 10% students very well. And I'll get the other faculties kind of take on. There's kind of a Vanderbilt letter type that Pinson does that has kind of gained some popularity, and um, I don't know if we have any that if anyone we have with Urology Unbound any examples, but what I'm thinking about that. So when you read it, he kind of talks about like how much he's interacted with the student, where they fit on the scale. And so what my kind of not so in love with that approach is it is a little overly standard. And then also they may say, I've interacted with this person 5%. And so they tell me all these things about their test scores, their publications, how they did on the sub-I, and then their interactions 5%. I was like, you don't know the person. Like, why did I just spend my time reading that? You don't know them. And so one way to maybe use that rubric is to kind of get a sense of those who are going to write letters for you, how much time they've interacted with you, where do they kind of maybe feel, and definitely in terms of the percentage that they've worked with you. Because I stopped writing letters for sub-Is that I really didn't know, because I just couldn't generate it. I was starting from I don't know you, and I wanted to write a real letter. And I wasn't the program director, so that's a very different role. But again, someone you need to know to write a good letter for you is really critical for those things. And some things that might be known, but they might not be known, is your home program always owes you a letter. It's often written by the program director, sometimes the co-written by the program director and the chair. Usually the program director has written that letter. And then when you do an away rotation, they owe you a letter. So you're not, pushing them by asking them to write you a letter. They owe you a letter. And that's kind of like someone saying, you're amazing. outside of your family. So it's like your family's like, yeah, she's the best daughter or son in the world. But then when, you know, someone outside says you're amazing, then people begin to believe it. And that's what the sub-I letter, the weight that it carries, or objectivity.
Absolutely. I'm going to get you, Dr. Santiago-Lastra, but I just wanted to address the fact that there's some questions in the chat about second year, you know, from a second year medical student and from students who are IMGs. We won't be able to address those tonight, but I wanted to introduce the fact that we are starting office hours. I believe next week, Nana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're going to have office hours for Urology Unbound. It's a Zoom call that will just be open, and will be there'll be urology faculty, residents who are on those just available to talk and give advice. So keep an eye out for that, because we definitely want to address your talk, but tonight is mostly dedicated to the interview season, as we just had a lot of questions about it. Go ahead, Dr. Santiago-Lastra.
Oh, I wanted to address what Dr. Downs was mentioning with regards to that standardized letter. I do use that standardized format in the beginning of my letters, specifically because students because I have sub-interns that rotate with me, for which I write letters. And I have students that I know deeply and personally that work with me, for which I write letters. And to have them all be in narrative format then sort of eliminates the possibility that I can let like my truest mentees like sort of really show how much more time I spend with some students than others. And I do think that programs appreciate understanding how students compare to their peers. And so if somebody is in the top, performed at the top of the sub-intern class, I think programs want to know those things and value those things in letters. But I do agree with Dr. Downs that that alone is not sufficient for a good letter. And when I see letters that just have that, and the interaction isn't that profound, I'm not as convinced by that letter. I love to see that and see how the student performed in comparison to their peers and at their away rotation or home rotation. But then I also like to look at the narrative to see how in depth did this person really get to know this individual, and how deeply do they recommend them as a candidate. And so I try to put a lot of energy into that. I have at times, I disagree that your programs owe you a letter. I have had times when I tell students that I can't write them a strong letter. And as such, I think it's better if I don't write it. So I don't owe them a letter if I don't think I can recommend them in at least a solid way. But I do agree that if you perform well, the program should be more than willing to write you a letter.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And it's been brought up a few times, but about emphasizing anytime you're asking for a letter that you're asking for a strong letter. And so many programs will write a letter for anyone, and it is like a right, like to Dr. Downs' point, that if you spent a month somewhere, that it's sort of understood that you'll get a letter, but you're not guaranteed a strong letter. And so you can save yourself and save everyone by just always asking for strong letters. And you would hope that people would approach it like Dr. Santiago-Lastra, where if they were not able to write a strong one, that they would decline. Unfortunately, every year we'll get some letters that are not strong, and it always blows my mind, because it feels like a lack, like just some lapse in like mentorship or guidance at some point, that someone was that disconnected to not know, and also or just not to know to ask for a strong letter, or to not realize that that's what would happen. And that's someone who, like, maybe all the other letters were strong and they might have been able to get a program. But if you have one weak letter, you're just, I don't see how you can match in urology. So you really need to, like, programs are drowning in applications, that giving them a reason to not consider you, like we're doing everything we can. That's what we like the office hours, all these things to like you don't want to give them any reason to not because you're just making the job easier to go from the hundreds to 3.
Absolutely. Let me see if there are any other application related questions in the chat. I do not see any specifically to the application. So that's just perfect because we are a bit over, but thank you everybody so much for coming this evening. I hope you all got something from this. This will be available on the Urology Unbound website. And we're going to try to get the login for our Vimeo showcase put into the GroupMe for those of you who are on the GroupMe, so that if you don't have access to the website already, you can always go onto the GroupMe to be able to see these webinars. And like I said, next week we will be starting with the office hours. We'll have 1 to 2 a week throughout the rest of the interview application and a little bit into the interview season, so that towards the end, or as we are approaching the interviews, we'll be able to do some mock interviews. Even though we can't do our mock interview weekend in the way we wanted to this year, we'll have people available to do practice interviews during those office hour sessions. So definitely look out for those. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a good evening.